That's why. Okay. I know Steve well. I love Steve. Yes. Steve was on from the committee. He served together. Steve was sitting out of the house. I originally from Chicago. So I used to be.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone, and welcome back to day 2 of the Energy Superabundance Workshop. To start, I want to I also want to thank our many initiative partners for their continued support. I'd also like to take a moment to recognize the WGA team for their fantastic work in pulling this all together. In particular, I want to thank Abby Pelsmacher for her fantastic leadership and work leading our team's efforts in support of this initiative. And all this while she's a huge Dodgers fan, so I know she's compounded in the stress. So thank you, Abby, for what you're doing for us. And lastly, I want to acknowledge former Western governor from the great state of Colorado, Governor Bill Ritter, who's with us. There you are, right behind there you go. He'll moderate a panel later today, but certainly glad to have you, Governor Ritter, who interrupted his hunting trip to come join us today. So that's how strong Abby has a poll here. So we appreciate you being here, Governor. So yesterday we were joined by experts and leaders from across the West to discuss key issues related to transmission. Panelists examined the transmission investments needed to ensure more reliable and affordable energy and how collaborative efforts like West Tech can play a key role in meeting transmission needs. Experts also discussed the permitting challenges new transmission lines face, explored financing mechanisms, and looked at the role of transmission authorities. We also examined co-location opportunities for transmission and explored how policy efforts in Colorado are providing a framework that can help shape transmission expansion across other Western states. And if you missed any of these discussions yesterday, videos of each panel will be available on WGA's YouTube page. Today, we will build upon these discussions with panels examining Western transmission projects, grid resilience and modernization considerations, as well as grid security implications. And so with that, I'd like to welcome our first panel to help us get started today. Abby? Across other Western states.
Jack.
And if you missed any of these discussions yesterday, videos of each panel will be available on WGA's
You couldn't even get elected officials to think of transmission as infrastructure. Railways were infrastructure, highways were infrastructure. And now, AI arms race with China, surging, load growth and demand, and suddenly transmission is right center stage. So I'm really excited about this conversation. I am at Pattern Energy. I've been there 12 years, and I oversee our government affairs, our communications, our regulatory, sustainability, and public engagement, like ground game type stuff. And we're doing it. Like you said, we're actually right now energizing a 550-mile T-line that goes from eastern New Mexico through Arizona to California. It's the first HVDC technology to be deployed in this country in 30 years. And it only took us 18 years to get it done. So we have a few ideas on how to maybe shave some time off that, but I'll hand it to my colleagues.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. All right. So make sure you can hear me. Thank you for the invitation to be here. My name is Robert Kinney. I have the privilege of serving as the president of Xcel Energy Colorado, or Public Service Company of Colorado, as we're called. I'll just really briefly, I'm located here in Denver. We're the main provider for pretty much the entire state of Colorado. But so welcome to Colorado, welcome to Denver. We serve 8 states and we're organized in operating companies. So Texas and New Mexico. Part of Texas and New Mexico, we're in the Southwest Power Pool. We serve Michigan and Wisconsin, Minnesota and the 2 Dakotas and MISO, and then we serve Colorado, and we're the only single state operating company of our 8 states. And we're not in an RTO. We serve 1.6 million electric and 1.5 million gas customers, so we're dual fuel, both electric and gas throughout the state of Colorado. This discussion, I will say, I had the privilege, I've been with Xcel for 3 years. I was at another Western utility for 7 years where I ran state and federal regulatory affairs. And then I was on the Missouri Public Utilities Commission for 6 years before that. Missouri was in both SPP and MISO. When I was in California, obviously interacted with the California Independent System Operator, CAISO. So I've had a broad array of experiences that have given me, fortunately or unfortunately, a broad perspective on some of these issues. And one of the things I'll say is that over at least the last 15, 17 years, I don't know that the conversation has largely changed in terms of the obstacles and challenges. And a lot of it boils down to not necessarily a discussion around the need for transmission, but the speed at which we're able to get it built, and then how we allocate costs across regions. And those challenges seem to be perennial and constant, but it also feels like we're in a moment where there's greater sense of urgency and necessity to solve those problems. It's too bad that it usually takes a crisis to do it, but that's the moment I think in which we find ourselves. And I don't say a crisis in a negative sense, but the need for transmission is growing increasingly more acute, which I think is going to force us to have more of these types of conversations as we drive to solutions. So I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm just really excited to have this discussion.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Robert Taylor. Really excited to be here with the panel. Congrats to Abby for putting a good group together, and appreciate being part of it. So I've been with Invenergy now. Invenergy is one of the leading privately held clean energy developers in the country. We got our start as a natural gas development company and moved into wind, very much a solar and storage focus as well. Transmission is we've been working on transmission now for about 5 years. We have our flagship project, the Greenbelt Express project, which is still moving forward in the center of the country. We have an early stage development project in the west called New Mexico North Path. With the example that the pattern set there, we decided that looked really easy, and we were going to try and do the same thing. Sorry for the lightheartedness there, but that's the need is there. So personally, I've been with Invenergy for about 3.5 years. I came over from a PJM utility, spent a number of years there, mostly in the PJM stakeholder process, and also some time in MISO. We decided that looked so coming with kind of easy RTO perspective as well, and some of those things that work and some of those things that maybe work less so. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned in kind of the positives and the negatives there. And then, had a stint with the Pennsylvania Energy Office and came out of the nuclear power industry. So, I think, and it's kind of interesting when you kind of hear from the group that's here, kind of a varied perspectives, right, of how some of these things are being solved. I think at a high level, I think we're asking some of the similar questions we have for a long time. The way that I typically describe it, though, is, the way that transmission projects are, you determine the need, who's going to pay for them, what are the processes. In some ways, we're asking bigger questions than we had before. We're asking more of the transmission system we had before. The changing resource mix, whether that is, wind and solar and the intermittent resources, or if it is, a natural gas, portfolio operating off of a similar, the same pipeline, of what does that mean and how those planning perspectives kind of move together and what the transmission system is being asked to do. The other thing that I kind of like to use this at the stage, I'm a believer in utilities, that they do a phenomenal job within their footprint with what they're tasked with doing. And then you get the regionalization, whether that's the FERC planning regions or the RTOs within their footprint, within kind of the bounds of what's in their tariff and what they plan for. They do a really nice job with it. But I think one of the gaps here that, I think maybe talk about some of these potential solutions today is like, who knits those regions together that's kind of a gap right now, right? So we've had, the NERC study that was done is kind of showing some of the need that we think that, there are significant and growing needs for interregional transmission. I always have to give a shout out to Rob Gramlich, who I think is the person who coined this term, is we need a transmission system bigger than the weather. I mean, we've done the analysis. You know that every second or third year, there is going to be a major impact somewhere on the U.S. electric grid that some significant region is going to have a very, very bad day. And if you don't have the generation capacity in your zone to handle it, and I think on those bad days, you don't, that's kind of something happens, whether it's weather or something else. And if you don't have strong ties to your neighbors or your neighbors' neighbors available to close the gap on those really bad days, it makes a really bad day worse. And whether that is fuel costs being securitized, up from a 3-day storm forward 15 or 20 years, whether that's rotating power blackouts, my personal story is like 3 years ago, driving home to East Tennessee, where I grew up, my parents had rotating power blackouts on Christmas Eve, 30 minutes every 4 hours. And, we need to have fewer of those. I mean, people depend on the grid. We need to have it. And so how you kind of move those things forward, I think we need to continue looking at that. And then some of the tools that we can talk about now about how to close that gap specifically in the West. And, maybe, some creativity that's being utilized here, I think is going to go a long way towards closing that gap. So appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Awesome. And yes, like you mentioned, quite a myriad of perspectives and experiences on this panel with folks who have built or are building or planning to build transmission projects. So maybe we'll start with you, Sarah. In your experience building and working on the SunZia project, what are some of the lessons learned there, some of the setbacks or successes that you'd like to share with us about that project?
Yeah. Boy, that's a doctoral thesis, but I'm going to try to, and a second cup of coffee or maybe a third. But to distill some of it, really think about this 550-mile T-line, taking an energy island, connecting it into load. The original idea, the original reason for SunZia was it's very difficult to build anything in California but solar. Right. And so we just knew, we saw the physics of the duck curve on the horizon, because obviously the shape of solar production is like this. Well, the reason you need a grid bigger than the weather is because you need to move the electrons around, however they're being produced, wherever they're being produced. And when you have non-correlated weather systems, you can create complementary products, right? And we're doing a lot more of energy products now. That's something I think people don't really understand. There's this kind of picking winners and losers amongst different generation forms, but as a power provider, we meet our customers where they are. Often they're investor-owned utilities. They say, I need a capacity product, or I need this, or I need this shape, or this resource adequacy, and we create a product. So in this circumstance, here was California production. You look at eastern New Mexico, and you've got wind blowing on the shoulders. It's the exact perfect complement to that shape and profile. So we started going, there's a commercial opportunity here, right? I think one really big thing to highlight is, it's platitudinous, but you cannot get something done like this without massive stakeholder engagement. 3 cups of tea, the number of kitchen tables you sit around, the number of conversations, the concerns you hear and address from every single landowner. I'm not saying it's easier. It's a little easier in the West because you have big parcels of land, versus when you try to do it back east, it gets much, much more difficult. But think about this. This is all private capital. There is not a single penny of subsidy, not local, not state, not federal, and there is no eminent domain rights, right? So it is really just inch by inch, mile by mile. You've got to show up with benefits to the stakeholders in the communities. You got to listen to a lot of folks and talk to a lot of folks. And you got to bring the money people with you. And that's a good news thing now. Just like the politicians are waking up to the need for transmission, the money folks, the capital is on the sidelines now saying, how do we get into this game? And so making sure they're part of the equation early. We're seeing increased investment in transmission, entities. There's not that many of us, Invenergy being one of them. You've got Grid United, you've got Transwest. There's probably 10 that are really doing that. So I don't know if I have a silver bullet right now. I know we're going to get into some policy solutions and people have talked about it yesterday. You know, I will do a shout out for the infrastructure authorities. You put me near a microphone and I will talk about state infrastructure authorities, because that's the other thing I would say before I pass the mic. Governors matter and states matter really much more. We tend to get fixated on the federal level. As the feds reach down, the states need to reach up, and the state collaboration, and especially if they have infrastructure authorities, and it can be agnostic. It can be for oil pipelines, gas pipelines, transmission, just energy transportation. Before SunZia, our down payment on SunZia was Western Spirit. That was 1,000 megawatt generation facility enabled by a 150-mile T line. For that one, the RETA in New Mexico gave us access to eminent domain rights, but used as last resort. I think that's the conversation we should be having around eminent domain rights as last resort. Very, very managed, very heavily regulated. And for us, we only used it on 4 parcels. And that's because we could not find title. That the people had passed on, the family had lost track of the land. And so it's a very surgical use of eminent domain rights that was afforded us through the infrastructure authority that made a world of difference.
Yeah. And Robert, you know, obviously the Excel's project is different, but also quite similar in some of the challenges to SunZia, especially on sort of that community engagement or partnership aspect. What are you seeing and what are some of the challenges or best practices that you've learned there?
You're referring to Power Pathway. And before I get to Power Pathway, Robert, you just reminded me of the Invenergy project, the Greenbelt Express. I dealt with that when I was on the Missouri Commission, and it was the subject of that book, Superpower.
Yep.
And that's been 15 years ago.
Yep.
And the lessons remain the same. I'll say community engagement, community engagement, community engagement. So I was on the commission when that project was slated to go across 8 counties in Missouri. And I'm from Missouri. And I learned new phrases, century farm and other things. And the notion of using eminent domain was something that was anathema to the rural landowners and caused significant concern and uproar. And that project, we had public participation hearings twice a day in every single county. They would start at noon, go to 6. They would start again at 6 and go to 11 o'clock at night. There was a lot of emotion and passion around that. And that project actually informed a lot of my thinking as I've gone from being a commissioner to working at 2 different utilities. And seeing the public outcry and response really hits home the notion that community engagement is critical for a whole host of reasons. And we can talk more about the value proposition of the infrastructure that we build, and that should be part of the discussions too. But Power Pathway, and I can't take credit for all this because it started before I arrived at the company, but we did a significant amount of community engagement 18 to 24 months before we even finalized the routing. And that was critical because we were able to take in that public commentary and actually make changes to the routing based upon what we heard from those communities, some of which weren't in our service territory. So that made it even more challenging that we were building a transmission line that was going to cut through land for customers that we didn't even serve. And so it didn't completely eliminate a lot of the consternation and a lot of the pushback that we've gotten, and we're still dealing with some of that. But for a multi-county, multi-jurisdictional project, the amount of community engagement that we did ahead of time, and it was very focused, open houses, very transparent. It was social media campaigns. It was using our website to be as transparent as possible. I think that rather than having 2 counties that have opposed the project, we would have had significantly more.
And is your experience at Invenergy similar or?
Yeah, I mean, it broadly is, right? I mean, and I think this is one where I think, Sarah, the difference is, between kind of the utility model, for better or worse. If Public Service Colorado is going out and talking to landowners, they know who you are. They know that, you're there to provide reliable service. If you're coming in as a non-incumbent, you have to start with who is Invenergy? So when there's just no shortcuts for that, right? So if you're coming through a town, you need to do those outreach, you need to build those relationships, you need to bring people together. We've got a strong team of folks. That's their job, is just to kind of reach out and do that. And it's not them doing it on an island. It's them working in and bringing in the technical experts and making sure that that feedback is being incorporated into the design, into the route. And there's not a shortcut. There's not an easy button for that. The other thing is to be in a situation to try and explain what merchant transmission is to landowners is not a place that anybody wants to be. It doesn't fit the narrative, well, you're not the utility, you're not serving me, starting with that. I mean, there again, it just, taking the time, building the relationships, finding agents of trust in the community to bring those things together, to bring it down to the kitchen table where you can have those conversations and talk about why that is, and to build a very kind of clear benefit structure for the communities and why it's there and what it's going to be used for.
I can't get my dad to understand what it is. So.
Yeah, that's kind of a good point. And we were talking to somebody yesterday, talking about like having AI videos or songs or something that can kind of communicate.
We need to build some TikTok.
Yeah.
That's what we need to
do. I'll get right on that.
There actually was a YouTube video that talked about Greenbelt, one of like those explainer videos. We didn't necessarily, I mean, it's like it's a little tongue in cheek and I did mention this. I went to grad school and met my wife at Missouri and Columbia. So there is a couple of jabs thrown at Kansas in the video. So we didn't exactly make too much hay out of the video, but there are people that can do it.
So I guess in terms of communicating that value proposition, maybe beyond communities, whether that's to ratepayers or regulators, investors, what are some of the strategies there that you've found to be particularly successful?
I would say the first strategy is to not denigrate other people's business models or technologies, right? It was a lovely kumbaya moment here when Robert was like, hey, I love utilities. That's not always the case, right? This can be like the sharks and the jets up here, y'all. But we really are, to your point, crisis, I think, is a good word. It's the Rahm Emanuel, let no crisis go to waste. And I think it's forcing partnerships, more openness. And we certainly share that view. Heaven knows I don't want your job. I'm so grateful you're doing it, right? And vice versa. Yeah, it's a great job. Well, so is mine. But I mean, the interregional is a different nut to crack, right? So this collaboration and coordination. So just speaking ill of other technologies or other business models is an absolute non-starter. I think it's also important to be extremely truthful and grounded in the facts, and not just the facts of what you want, what your vision is. It's the facts of the grid, right? You have to be a good custodian of the grid. It doesn't matter if it advantages your bottom line, if it advances your pipeline, right? So first of all, it's got to be the right project, the right time, right location, and good for the grid, right? And then you really also need to be able to explain the physics and the economics of why it's the right thing, right? So this does not lend itself. There's some advocacy and lobbying that you can skate across the surface and Senator, can I get your vote on this if we play some golf? This is not that. This stuff is a grind. So I think, kind of radical honesty and really understanding what they care about, right? A landowner is going to care fundamentally about something entirely different set of concerns than a banker, right? And the last thing I would say is also, I think you need to acknowledge up front, hey, we build transmission. That's great. We make money when we build transmission, although we take the risk that we make money. But the best transmission is the transmission you never have to build, right? So actually being upfront, like reconductoring, let's do that. Let's do that. Like grid enhancing technologies. We need, with the surge in demand we're facing, we absolutely need everything. And so put that on the table and start with that. And the conversation goes much better.
So I'll echo the notion of meeting people where they are and tailoring your message for your audience. And I've got a couple of examples of that. And one's from when I was in Missouri. I'll use that as an example again, and talking to a state legislator who told me this was when we were drafting the rules for our renewable portfolio standard. And the thing that he said to me was, he just summarily right off the bat said, I don't believe in climate change. And so don't come in here talking to me about that renewable stuff for purposes of climate change. The conversation then shifted and we had a discussion about the job creation, the tax base, the lease payments to landowners. And it was at that point that his whole demeanor changed. And he said, keep talking about that. Talk about what it means from an economic development standpoint. And so again, it is another example of how you've got to meet people where they are. I will say with regulators, one of the things that I've been, and I can say this as a former regulator, regulators go to a lot of conferences and they hear things from a lot of vendors and probably some of y'all that might be in this room, and they'll take that to mean that by using grid enhancing technologies or dynamic line rating or reconductoring that we can completely avoid building new infrastructure. And it's just, please know that it doesn't mean that. And this is, so I think that radical transparency, that radical honesty applies in equal force, particularly with regulators, policymakers that may or may not have the deep knowledge of the physics that you all do and that we do. And so making sure that they understand exactly what the technology can and cannot accomplish. Because what I've said is with grid enhancing technologies, we absolutely need to do everything that we can to maximize the efficiency of the existing transmission network. That doesn't mean we're going to completely avoid building new transmission. It may mean that we can avoid building as much, but we're not going to avoid building it altogether. And the discussions nowadays are really focused toward, at least at the policymaking level, the cost, the price, the value of those, and what it's going to mean for customers from an affordability standpoint. So that's being very realistic and being very honest about what technologies can and cannot do.
Well, I mean, the only thing I'll kind of add on to that though is, when you look at the West in particular, and, a lot of us spend some time back East, and you've got the organized markets and the RTOs, those institutions, in all cases were designed decades ago. They were implemented for a very specific set of tasks, and to the benefit at this point, and you'll hear me say this a couple of times, it's like half exciting and half terrifying. But one of the things about the West is you don't have the baggage. I mean, the RTOs, they do some things really, really well, but they are a creature of the tariff that they operate under. And if you're asking a question that isn't kind of described in that tariff, inaction is the default. So in the West, there's space for creativity. There's space for people like Pattern that go inch by inch and push these projects through. And we're really excited to see that project come online. There's space for the transmission authorities and how you ask these questions and really come at it with a focus of convening and bringing people together to describe those benefits and those needs and try and move forward together in a kind of a collaborative way. The other thing to touch on is the Western Transmission Consortium. A couple of the folks are here. I'm very optimistic about the direction there of, let's take a look at these plans that we've kind of done over and over again, and let's try and bring the people together to decide to actually go build them. So you've got that space for creativity. You're not necessarily bound in the same way to some of the processes that exist in other places. Take advantage of that, and I think I think the conversations are happening, and I know we're a part of some of those, and really excited to see those move forward as well.
I love that idea, creativity. I hadn't thought about that. I mean, that's what we do, right? We aren't constrained in the West, right? In the same ways. That was so well said, Robert. So we have a proposed transmission line. We got all sorts of stuff. It's not just SunZia. We got stuff we're doing now and stuff on the horizon. Some we're talking about, some we're not right now. And one of them is, our developers were looking at loads and say, hey, wait, we've got Salt Lake here and we've got Las Vegas here and we got a ton of geothermal here, right? And so, there's some ingredients in the test kitchen. What can we do with that? How do we ideate around these core things? We have, generation, we have demand, and we have data centers that are being proposed. So let's go look at that. Let's be creative. I love that idea.
Switching gears a little bit, I know, Sarah, you mentioned 18 years for the SunZia project, which is really no joke. Yeah. And, on the efficiency aspect, I know that's something we definitely need to improve on some of these timelines. What are some of your recommendations or thoughts there?
Yeah. First of all, since you use the word efficiency, I'll just highlight that interregional transmission is hyper efficient, right? You actually, if you invest in the right types of transmission, you actually don't have to build as much generation because there's a lot of inefficiency and stranded capabilities on the grid as it is now because it's too vulcanized. When you free them up, you create these super highways and start moving them around. It actually is very beneficial for ratepayers, right? Then, I mean, you see time and time again, the numbers are, 4x, 5x, 6x, that the investment in transmission results in a substantial, like 4 or 5x lowering of utility bills for consumers, right? So you used efficiency. So it's just, first of all, I know it's a touchy subject, but we are here to talk about policy and some recommendations at the federal level. Judicial reform is necessary. I mean, just full stop. Our T-line got litigated. It was heartbreaking for us because we'd done everything we could in terms of stakeholder engagement. Got litigated 9 years after the federal decision had been issued, right? And that's just, you can't build great things in a country where that is the standard course of action, right? So I think judicial reform is important. Also, this one's a very obvious idea, but it just doesn't always play out this way. Concurrent instead of iterative review processes, either the state or federal level, when you have environmental review or any other, grid studies, if you can stack these instead of make them linear, you can claw back a lot of time, right? And then I think also right now, to rise this moment, I would recommend we need to take a hard look at DOE and FERC authorities and see how we can push them, we can expand them, right? Are our historical read of these authorities quite modest, and are they meeting the moment? Is there now, I'm not saying government overreach, but this goes back to litigation. Is there a way where we can create some more breathing room where the statutes that are already on the books can empower more decisive action?
Well, just to build on that, I mean, I think the governor's letter that went in earlier this week that came out, I mean, that's a good step. I mean, there's some common sense things in there to have that group of governors and to see governors being the ones that are pushing that at the federal level, I think is very important. The other thing, and just to kind of touch on something that Sarah said, is like, transmission is efficient. I would also say transmission of all of the technologies you're talking about on the grid, it's the least regrets option. If you're making significant investments in generation, you're tied to a fuel source, you're tied to a location. Transmission is something that when it's there, even if you don't end up, being there for that exact purpose you built it for, it enables optionality later. It enables leaning on it, if the resources you thought to be there aren't going to be there. And this is one of those things. And this is, a number of years ago, kind of an eye-opening moment I had. We were looking at some of the PJM build out, the history of the build out of the 500 kV network in the mid-Atlantic. When you look at that plan and when that was designed, there's a lot of substation names on there that don't make a lot of sense. It was kind of built out and negotiated by the utilities at the time. There was a lot of nuclear plants and a lot of large fossil plants that never got built. And, we had a conversation, and it was actually in a PJM stakeholder meeting. A colleague of mine who was at a renewable developer at the time was saying, people were worried about, building too much and stranded assets. And he's like, we built this. And like half of the plants that were on that plan to justify the build out of the 500 kV ring in the mid-Atlantic never got built. But there's not a time when that system, I mean, that's the backbone of the grid, and it was fully utilized within the first couple of years. Transmission is to some extent, I'll caveat this in a second, but it is the closest thing we're gonna have to build it and they will come. That doesn't mean it's a blank check. We need to be thoughtful. We need to kind of put in a plan. But the way the timelines work, you're going to have to make a decision with the best information you have to kind of put together a transmission plan to enable the next steps. So we want to be thoughtful about that. We know that rising bills are going to be, are critically important at this point. So you're making decisions about where scarce dollars are going to be used. But I think transmission is one of those things. It's the least regret and have one of the best benefit to cost ratios you're going to see. And I really kind of applaud the efforts to move that forward.
So I'm reflecting on your question. I'm thinking, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Is it speed? Is it cost allocation? Is it building across state lines? It's all of the above. And I kind of go back to what I said before. I remember, because I'm reflecting on Sarah, your comment about expanding federal authority. And I'll say that seems like an option, but I know that state regulators guard their prerogatives and states are going to be parochial. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. that's their job. And so the notion of expanding federal authority always makes me a little nervous. Because I ask, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? And one of the questions I'll just ask this as a provocative question, this problem we're solving today is probably not the same problem we were solving when FERC Order 1000 came around. And FERC Order 1000 wanted to try to drive more interregional building, and it wanted to drive cost allocation. In a world in which states now are building tremendous amounts of renewables to serve their own native load, is the problem the same today as it was 20 years ago? And I'd argue that it's, I mean, maybe my question presupposes the answer, but are we solving the same problem today that we were trying to solve 15 years ago? I would argue that we're not. But I do think that, going back to your original premise, we do need siting and permitting reform, whatever that looks like. But certainty and predictability are always important. It shouldn't take 18 years to get a piece of infrastructure built under any circumstances. And if that's a function of overregulation, or if it's a function of unclear regulation, that's something we can solve. That's a policy issue. It's not a physical issue. And so I just think it's a delicate balance between asking the state to have greater authority and being very clear about the problem that we're solving first.
Sort of outside of authorities for policies, Robert mentioned the consortium, and we talked about some potential creative solutions. But are there other sort of workforce initiatives or broader initiatives or energy goals, policies, institutional reforms that could play a role here, or there's a needed gap that needs to be filled?
Oh, I mean, workforce, we could have a whole seminar on workforce, right? No, I mean, heck, go try to hire a nuclear engineer right now, right? Absolutely. I mean, I don't even know where to start with that, but on a macro level, we absolutely need more electrical engineers. We need to be encouraging young people to go into these sciences. And I'm pretty darn sure those are pretty resilient jobs that aren't going to be taken out by AI, right? So let's go, that can be our bumper sticker. At the local level, though, it's very serious also. I mean, we hired, so for the 550-mile transmission line, we hired damn near every single IBEW worker in a 3-state region, right? They had the skills, right? And delivered the quality product. We also are in the West, more geographically, diffuse, where we have very big tracts of land. And so you have to think about workforce location, workforce safety when they're having to commute a couple of hours each direction to get to their job, whether it's a construction site or a generation facility. So you also need to think about local benefits and local access. So we are regularly partnering with either the state universities or the community colleges to do, tech trainings. You cannot be passive right now. If you're in a sector, if you're in generation and transmission, you have to be very active about workforce. We even, given how remote our generation assets are in New Mexico, we're looking at developing housing, and that's not what we do for a living. We're developers, but it's not housing. So it's a great question. And one of the good things is there's a lot of partners thinking about that. So my recommendation would be, let's talk to one another. Let's not always recreate the wheel, and let's sit around some common tables. Like the Clean Power Institute is very focused on energy workforce development. So let's try to knit ourselves together, because if we do it each separately, it's going to be wildly inefficient.
I'd say, in addition to workforce development, which is really, really important, the other issues that we're facing are just supply chain issues that continues, and it's not solely related to being in a post-COVID world. So supply chains were disrupted during COVID, but now what we're seeing is competition even outside of our industry. So I think about building large transmission projects. You have to have concrete to be able to pour footings, and we're competing with AI developers and housing developers for raw materials. And so that's a significant challenge as well. One of the successes, or one of the, I guess, innovative things that we did with Power Pathways, we're working with an EPC contractor. We had a performance incentive mechanism imposed on us by the commission for that project for time and on time and on budget. performance incentive mechanisms. We brought in an EPC contractor to help manage the project, who within the contract, they also have performance incentive mechanisms. And so they benefit if we're on time and under budget to the same degree that we do. And so they were then also able to source materials, source labor. It's been a really I don't want to say it's unique because it's not singular, but it was a creative and new way of working with a general contractor to co-manage the project with us. That's been very useful and helpful in being able to locate labor and materials, and has allowed us to bring that project in. It's on time and under budget so far. That is indeed. Is indeed.
I don't have much to add. I mean, I think those are phenomenal answers. And, you know, like if we could solve workforce development and supply chain, I think we're going to be doing pretty darn well.
One of the things I'll say that's maybe, you know, not this is like an education issue, but being able to partner with your union and your local community colleges and other institutions of higher learning in your geographic footprint. And then this is just something that's incumbent upon all of us, is to destigmatize an associate's degree or a professional degree that's a non-4-year degree. Our society has a bias toward that. One of the things I often talk about when I talk about Excel, we are a utility that delivers electrons and gas molecules. But even more than that, we're actually an infrastructure company that builds infrastructure. And we have 3,900 employees and coworkers around the state of Colorado. Half of those or more are unionized coworkers that are in jobs that pay them 6 figures that don't require a college education. And that's a narrative that we don't often talk about, is we have to destigmatize the notion of not getting a 4-year degree and make these jobs more attractive. And that's something I've been really focused on.
Totally.
Well, I do want to leave time for audience questions. If any of you have questions or comments for our panel, raise your hand and we'll get you a mic.
Hi, Doug Howell, EF consultant. 2 questions, they're related. And that, Sarah, you talked about the prolonged implementation of SunZia, permitting and lawsuits slow that down. And there seems to be a growing assumption that with early engagement before any technical work is done on routing and siting, and you front load that you can save money on the back end by reducing permitting and the lawsuits. So questions for all of you. First question, do you believe that it's a better economic investment to do the community engagement first before you draw any lines on a map? And a lines on the map at distinction. West Tech has lines on the map. CETA in their gap analysis has lines on the map. They go bend over backwards to explain that that's not a definitive line going through your backyard. So what I'm talking about is the engineering stuff that traditionally happens behind closed door, routing and siting. Do you believe that, one, it's more economical to front load the community engagement before you do those lines on the map? And are you committed, each of you as 3 different companies, to doing that?
Yes. So absolutely. I would say it's a chicken and egg. You do have to do some viability engineering first. So you're not just out peddling fiction. You know, I'm not trying to send you, it's like hope is not a strategy, you know, this just pointing on a map like this is not a T-line. So you do have to do some upfront investments before you go and talk to anyone to develop some level of conviction that this is a viable line. And that's what we said even about the creativity with, you know, you got Salt Lake here, you've got Las Vegas here, you've got geothermal here. You kind of can, then you do a fatal flaw for environmental, for example. Are there waterways? Are there other things? So do that up front so you've got some conviction. And then absolutely go out, talk early and often. And that was done on SunZia, but again, that was 550 miles across, 3 states. And that's a little shocking, right? To say we did that and it took 18 years, but that's not dispositive because no infrastructure like this goes under cover of night. And maybe it never would have gotten done if we hadn't done that. And you absolutely have to be willing to listen through tribal consultation, through environmental consultation. There are things you don't know. You don't have God knowledge of all of these areas. And so you have to be prepared to have a margin of redirection and change and adaptation. Otherwise, it's not real stakeholder engagement. Otherwise, it's just glad handing. So you have to do it in substantively. And yes, I do believe that pays dividends on the back end in terms of a lot of fees of like engineering, permitting, timelines, that type of stuff.
So definitively, yes. It's hard to prove a negative. Like, had you not done it, would it have taken you 20 years instead of 18? So it's challenging, but intuitively and logically, yeah, it's going to pay dividends. And I'd also say there's no downside to it. So why not do it and build goodwill with your customers and your communities? The power pathway is 500 miles. It's 345 kV double circuit along the Eastern Plains, multiple counties. It's all intrastate, so it's slightly different, but we still have to go county by county because we don't have statewide permitting here in Colorado. So we have to go county by county. And I'm confident that had we not done the work that we did, 18 months in advance, that we would have had more than 2 of our counties. It's 2 of like 6 or 8 counties that we have to get permits from. I'm confident we would have had problems with more than 2 of those counties. I'd also say, for us, if I take a step back, we are building transmission, we are building generation and distribution. So we're building infrastructure across the entire value stream of the electron. And then we have a natural gas system that I have to maintain as well. We do a lot of community outreach and education and engagement because we are always in our communities. And what we've learned is that the gone are the days where the utility is invisible to customers and communities. And because of all of the discussions around the cost and the price of the product that we provide, and I'm avoiding using the term affordability intentionally, but because of the increased focus on the costs of the product that we provide, the infrastructure that's required to provide it, people are paying more attention to us. And so we know that we're going to file rate cases. That's what utilities do. And you probably are reading about this. All the utilities around the country are announcing 40, 50, 60, 70 billion dollar capital plans over a 5-year period across TD, energy supply, and natural gas. That obviously has the attention of regulators, policymakers, customers. And so we know that we've got to do a very different job of articulating the value proposition of all of the infrastructure that we're going to be building. And it's inherently the right thing to do, but it also makes your job easier in front of policymakers. And so I'm very confident that we have to do it. We have to do it early. We have to do it with radical transparency, and we have to do it across all of the infrastructure that we're building.
Yeah, and so I'll certainly endorse everything that's been said there. And just to kind of add a couple of components there. One, yes, it's the right thing to do, right? I mean, yes, the planning, the initial stage work, to have those conversations, to know what you're talking about. You need to kind of do the due diligence. Does this work? Then you can start getting into the micrositing of where this is and have the conversations with the communities. I think the other thing, I think you're hearing this from all 3 of us, and I think this is because of the 3 institutions we're from. The term that we use for this is we come into these projects with an owner's mentality. We're not coming in to do a project, flip it, and leave town. We're coming in, those initial conversations we're having about, hey, we think we might have a project in your area on your land. We're making those introductions and talking about that project with an intention to be there for decades. And so building those relationships and treating people like, you have an expectation to be there. Not, I think all 3 of us are similarly situated there, but that's not the case for everybody. So if you've got a bad actor that can do things, it can make life much more difficult the next time around. But then, the second piece of this answer is explaining some of these processes to the general public is hard. And different parts of the country, and I think thus far, maybe, other than, California, is like, the eastern regions, if you're responding to a solicitation, you're being, the process is you need to draw a line on a map and put in a cost-contained bid saying, this is what I'm going to do, and you're doing it in a 4-month or 6-month window. One, there's not time to do that community outreach in the right way. So you kind of have to put that bid in, with the route. but then you need to caveat it in those ways. Like, yes, we are confident that we can do something along these lines, knowing that as soon as you get an award from an RTO, you're going to come back and have those conversations and get into, okay, what is this actually going to look like, and validate what those assumptions were and take that feedback in to make sure that you've got a project that's going to move forward with that strategy in place.
Yeah, Robert said something really worth emphasizing. Basically, energy literacy, electricity literacy. You guys wouldn't be shocked, you're pros, but I mean, it is shocking how little people know about electricity. So we're starting from behind. And I was having a conversation with Jim Robb over at NERC a few weeks ago in DC and said, how do we help elected officials really understand the magnitude of this challenge and what we're trying to do? He was very kind about it. He said, well, that's a little tough given that most elected officials still think electricity comes from the wall. Like, okay.
Hi, Dolly Edmonds with Audubon, and just wanted to first start off and say thank you, Sarah. I didn't get to work on SunZia, but I had colleagues that did, and so appreciated the opportunity to be able to have conversations with y'all and recognizing you were trying to minimize impacts and being open to those.
Y'all were a tremendous partner on that project. Thank
Right.
you.
Question is actually for Robert on Power Pathway. It's kind of a multi-part question. First, it's can you let us know where the project stands? And follow up to the panel discussion yesterday, curious about how co-locating along highways was part of your decision-making. I'm thinking I-70 specifically. And then also curious as to how engagement with Colorado Parks and Wildlife went.
So the first question is, it's in 5 groups or 5 segments. We've completed work on one of them thus far. We expect to be, so we started the project in 2021 and began construction in 2023. So it was a very fast process, and that was from the application at the commission through approval and construction. And so we're on time, we're under budget. We have 2 counties on one of the segments that did not give us the permits that we needed. In Colorado, the Public Utility Commission has backstop authority to overrule the decision of a local community, of a city or county. We obviously, to my earlier point, similarly with eminent domain, we don't want to usurp the prerogatives of the county until we absolutely have to. And so spent a lot of time with El Paso and Elbert counties trying to allay the concerns of the communities there, but we were not successful in that regard. They denied our permits. So we have 2 pending proceedings at the commission on a parallel path. We have proceedings that are in circuit court so that we can get the permits that we need so we can stay on time and on budget. We built into the schedule some of this eventuality because we understood that there would be some communities that would oppose the project. So we expect that even with the PUC processes, that will still be on time. The second question, with routing in the rights of way, we try to make sure that we are being as least disruptive as possible. I can't tell you specifically on which parts of the route, because it's 500 miles, where we did locate in an existing public right of way, but we want to make sure that we're locating either in existing rights of way that we already have, or rights of way that are on existing roads. And we have partnerships with the state to be able to co-locate equipment and infrastructure in existing rights of way. And we try to do that as much as possible, not just with transmission, but with distribution infrastructure as well. So, and then your third question was, how did we work with Parks and Wildlife? I will confess, I haven't heard that we've had any specific issues with Parks and Wildlife. We do have, and this is not on a transmission project. This is actually on a wind farm that we're working on right now, where we have some challenges with a burrowing owl, and we've had to halt construction because we make sure that we are adhering to state and federal law. And so I'd say we have constructive relationships with both our federal and state partners, where we're working on federal lands, or where we're working where there are sensitive habitats or endangered species. We make sure that we're following all the laws.
Abby, I recently learned a new number. And if I can leave the room with this number, because I found it staggering, and it really defines the challenge, and my gratitude for everyone in the room focusing on these. issues. I've been working with a group called Open Minds, and they have a grid vision program, and they're working with Bain on that. And they asked Bain to run some analytics. And Bain came back and identified that China right now is building 20,000 miles of transmission every single year. 20,000 miles. Now, if you normalize for land mass, you know, the US land footprint versus China, our equivalent would need to be, just to keep up. And this is talking AI arms race here, which is a very real thing and one of this White House's absolute top priorities. So we should all be linking transmission to AI and energy dominance. It would need to be 5,000 miles a year, and we're in the hundreds on a good year.
Oh, certainly a long way to go, but would like to thank all three of you for your leadership and for your participation on this panel. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you. We are going to take a quick 10-minute break and get started with our next panel shortly.
Oh, okay. Hello, everyone. We're going to get our next panel for today set off. So modernizing the grid is a crucial step to addressing challenges such as aging infrastructure, extreme weather, and emerging load pressures. This panel will take a look at how grid enhancing technologies can unlock capacity and optimize existing assets. And I'll turn it over to our esteemed moderator, Governor Bill Ritter.
Thank you. Thanks. After that last panel, I'm not sure politicians are viewed as esteemed in this room. I feel like maybe I have to defend the virtue of the industry a little bit. Anyway, we have a great panel today, and it's a pretty interesting topic to follow the last panel that was really about, you know, how to build transmission, what are the successful stories, what are some of the barriers to getting it done, because now it's about technology. And I'll just tell you a very quick story. Some time ago, I was doing a project for the White House, for the Obama White House, and it was like, how do you utilize federal agencies to try and accelerate the development of clean energy in America? And one of the things they wanted us to look at was the utility business model. And we took a group of utility CEOs to the White House to talk in part about how difficult it was to permit both infrastructure, the transmission and generating. But they also said, listen, technology is 10 years at least ahead of the utility industry. They said, but we're 10 years ahead of the utility commissions. So there's a 20-year gap between technology and the utility commissions. And I think we're at a place and a time where we have to close that gap. It's just so important for the time that we are in with respect to load gain, you know, electrification of many things, if not everything, some barriers in the way for the electrification of everything. But just the load gain that's coming and the need to have transmission to support that is it's important. And one of the answers to that, many of the answers to it may lie in technology. We've got this great group of experts this morning. We're going to talk about it. So I'm just going to introduce them by title. They're each going to give like a 3-minute introduction. And then we're going to go to Q&A for the panelists, but then follow that with Q&A from the audience in the last 5 or 10 minutes, depending on how much time we left. So Sarah Countess, Senior Associate for RMI, formerly Rocky Mountain Institute. Julia Selker, Executive Director of the Watt Coalition. Kate Strickland, Executive Director of the Smart Electric Power Association. And Peter Bram, the Vice President of Policy and Grid Strategy for CTC Global. So I'd ask you, Sarah, if you want to start with a 3-minute introduction just about your work and how it is relevant to this topic.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Sarah Toth-Kotwis. I'm with RMI. I focus on transmission grid reliability and advanced transmission technologies and how we can leverage those to make the grid more reliable and more affordable for consumers. And the way that I view this topic is not only that we need all of the above and more of the above, but when we make the best use out of the existing infrastructure that we have, that makes the case even more solid to consumers that we are utilizing your consumer dollars as best as possible. And in addition, we desperately need more long-haul transmission. And when you make that case super solid, that you've done the best you can with their money and everything that we have right now, it's a no-brainer. We need more transmission. So that's how I see it all fitting together.
Thanks, Sarah.
Hi, Julia Selker with the Watt Coalition. We're the Trade Association for Grid Enhancing Technologies. So people have used that word on stage a few times today. I want to make sure we're all on the same page about what tools we're talking about. So I represent vendors of dynamic line ratings, which are sensors and software that tell you how much capacity the transmission lines can actually carry. So if it's a windy day, a walking breeze increases transmission capacity by like 30%, which is a substantial amount of additional capacity. But if you're in a heat dome, your lines might have a lot less capacity than they would even on the worst case scenario day that utilities plan for. So DLR is a capacity and a reliability tool. Advanced power flow control are devices that sit at the substation, and they can reroute power from underutilized or overutilized lines to underutilized lines. So if a short high voltage line has lower resistance than the lower voltage network around it, you might want to push some power off of it or push more power onto it depending on, how the network is being used. And then the final technology is topology optimization software, which is sort of like the Google Maps for the grid. It looks at where energy is flowing and how you might redirect it by flipping switches that are already at the transmission substations to unlock significantly more capacity on the grid. So we promise 20 to 40% more capacity. That's a wiggly number. That's not the number you hear when you are talking about big transmission lines, but that's because these tools make use of the dynamic capacity of the existing grid. So it really depends on what your grid looks like, how much additional capacity there is, but there's a lot. And so it's a step change that we can take now. It's a efficiency move that we can take going forward to make sure that all the future lines are used to their best purpose. And as Maury said earlier, use cases change for transmission. And these are the tools that help you unlock the capacity that otherwise isn't naturally being used.
Thanks, Julia. Kate?
Yeah, good morning, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Kate Strickland, I'm a director on SEPA's Research and Industry Strategy team. And SEPA, or the Smart Electric Power Alliance, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a research, education, and convening nonprofit, non-lobbying organization. And we work to advance the electric power industry's transition to a clean energy future, really acting as a leading partner to the energy ecosystem and serving as a trusted counselor and thought leader to solve those critical industry-wide challenges and advance opportunities. Just for a little visibility, SEPA has over 1,000 members, including 700 plus utility members across the country. This represents 65% of US accounts. Additionally, we also have the majority of public service commissions, state energy offices, consumer advocates, and other federal and state agencies engaged as members. And SEPA's 3 strategic focus areas include grid growth globe. So clearly, just alignment with the other G today that we're discussing, gets. And really, we're working to maintain a resilient and flexible grid, grow to the energy demands of the moment and of the future, and share and scale solutions domestically and globally. Finally, just a table-setting remark for my comments today. SEPA's grid resilience and modernization work primarily focuses on the distribution system. So an opportunity to discuss today the transmission distribution interface, the opportunity to leverage all assets and optimize innovative solutions across our grid as a whole. And to think about the flexible resources, tools, procurement models, and solutions to add capacity quickly that utilities, regulators, grid operators, and the industry as a whole are looking for. Thanks so much.
That's great. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you for the opportunity to present. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and present. My name is Peter Brim, VP Policy and Grid Strategy for CTC Global. CTC is the original inventor of the advanced conductor. We're also the world's largest manufacturer of advanced conductors, have 5 manufacturing plants around the world. About half of our production is at our home production plant in Irvine, California. We are what we call advanced conductors, and related to that, of course, is advanced reconductoring. That's when you use basically advanced conductors to replace existing lines. And we have some good questions I think I'll follow up on here, but that's basically a story to build on what Julia said. Sometimes we're called a GET, sometimes it's not. So the high level description is we're all advanced transmission technologies. The level below that is you have GETs and you have advanced conductors. That's probably the best way to describe it.
Thanks, Peter. So in your remarks, I think you're going to talk about conducting and reconducting. So I'm not one of those politicians that think electricity comes out of a wall, but I'm asking for a friend. Talk a little bit about what reconducting is.
Great question. Reconducting, and of course who you talked to, but the industry, and certainly the advanced transmission technologies industry, describes advanced reconducting as basically replacing existing lines on existing structures with advanced conductors. And what you get out of that, I'm holding in my left hand here, I have the traditional ACSR below and our advanced conductor, same diameter, same a different weight, of course, because the advanced conductor is a little bit lighter because of the core. But basically, the advanced conductor gets you twice the capacity, 30% less line losses, and very significant now in the West, the carbon fiber that most of the advanced conductor company uses sags a lot less. So about half the thermal sag, which of course is a big issue in area that you have wildfire issues.
Go back to that, but thank you. Thanks. So, Sarah, the first question is going to be to you. What combination of actions do we need right now to deliver the energy abundance that the region's growth demands?
Great question. And I would say it's two main things. The smarter use of our existing infrastructure and making sure we're deploying all the advanced technologies that can make the best use and most efficient use out of the existing system. And secondly, to build more new transmission faster. We need both of those things. RMI recently published a States in Sync report that highlights the immense benefits that we could get if we were able to unlock a truly Western grid. And West Tech is working on building some of that out. So we know what we need to do. And actually, we have all of the technologies to accomplish that. So the grid enhancing technologies and along with advanced conductors, those being advanced transmission technologies, these are low cost and fast ways that we can unlock additional capacity on the existing grid and make the best use of consumer dollars we can. So we need both of those things.
We'll talk later as well about barriers, but is that report from RMI available online?
Oh yeah, for sure. It is available. Go to RMI's website. I can point you right to it.
Okay, thanks. So Julia, how do advanced transmission technologies support first, rapid load growth, and second, faster generation interconnection, and third, lowering energy costs? So I'll ask that again, rapid load growth, faster generation interconnection, and lower energy costs.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm alive. Okay. Yeah, so I think some of the examples are really impressive. I just learned about two of these that I'm going to share last week, but in San Jose area and in the Atlanta area, advanced power flow controllers have recently been deployed for load growth purposes. And in the San Jose area, making use of the existing grid available, they found 500 megawatts of additional capacity in this urban area where you can't really build a lot more. So that number to me is absolutely incredible. Similar story in the Atlanta region. Southern Company has been using advanced power flow controllers for a long time. And I wanted to mention your 20-year gap that you talked about. I think the original DOE grant supporting the development of this advanced power flow control technology was almost 20 years ago. And so this has been in development for that long. It's been commercialized for over a decade. So it's really time to start deploying these tools. Then I think on generator interconnection, some of my members are also generators. So EDF Power Solutions, Engie, a few other names you'll recognize, and they came to Watt saying, hey, can this help us plug into the grid faster? And so say you're building a wind farm and you get your utility says, yeah, we're going to need to rebuild this whole transmission line that's going to deliver your power. And they ask, well, under what circumstances is this the limiting factor? In a high wind scenario, when you're generating the most. Okay, well, what's the line capacity in that high wind scenario? Potentially 30 or 40% more than the utility knows. So they're looking for these technologies to be used in that interconnection process. And then in terms of lower costs, transmission topology optimization is being used by a utility in the Midwest, Alliant. They're a transmission dependent utility, so they worked with their transmission provider and said, how can we reconfigure the grid to lower our congestion costs? And they cut their congestion costs in half. So basically addressed half of the constraints that were increasing costs with this, with just transmission switching based on software evaluation, like so low cost. There's no hardware at it. So all of these solutions can be deployed in, I mean, the longest is the advanced power flow control, like 12 to 18 months. The rest can be deployed in less than a year. And Great River Energy is a co-op in Minnesota. They went from talking to a vendor to doing a pilot in 9 months. And then they expanded that pilot to be an operational deployment across multiple additional lines in less than a year. That's unheard of in the utility technology space. So these are the technologies that can be deployed on the timelines that large load are asking for right now. So very important that utilities adopt these that have been around for that 20-year gap, but we're really pushing for it now.
It's so important. I'll go back to my political orientation and think about, I think it's 36 governors elections next November. I suspect candidates in every one of those elections are going to be talking about energy costs and, the rising energy costs, inflationary pressures and all that. We heard about some of the different things involving supply chains and building transmission from Robert Kinney from Excel. There are other reasons that there are inflationary pressures, but it's going to be a watchword for candidates in governor's elections and legislative elections because there is this real concern about spiking energy prices. And so anything we can do to utilize technology for that is going to be really vitally important, especially in the political sphere.
Yeah, I actually have an example about how this saves us money as well. In our last year's report on getting interconnected in PJM, we found that a really modest deployment of the 3 grid enhancing technologies, about like 95 devices, would reduce energy costs for consumers annually $1 billion and interconnect 6 gigawatts of new generation. So it's really a very near-term solution to reduce costs and get more out of our system.
Is that in the report?
Yeah, you can find that online as well.
Online. So
Can I quickly,
Yeah, go
I want to bring it back to the large scale transmission that we all agree we also need. These solutions should be part of the planning process for getting that new transmission built. It's like, it's going to take X years plus or minus to get this asset online. What can we do in the interim to reduce costs? And how can we manage to take those outages that you need to do any upgrade without disrupting the system as much? And so all these technologies have applications there, and then optimizing the large scale asset once it's in place. One study found that by optimizing the rest of the grid around a new high voltage line, you could get 15 to 22% more use out of your high voltage line. That's 15 to 22% more on your benefit cost analysis to get you over the line to approval and help with cost allocation. So totally complementary solutions here.
Thanks. So a bit of a pivot, Kate, but a nice sequitur. One of the prior panelists talked about the best transmission is the transmission you don't have to build. And so this question is really about that. It's what technologies could help delay or reduce the need for new infrastructure and enhance grid resilience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. And certainly taking that perspective of a holistic one grid approach, right? Two sides of the same coin, transmission and distribution, our bulk power system, and then our distribution needs. And first, just actually wanted to continue a little bit on this load growth and energy affordability theme and share a SEPA public resource, the database of emerging large load tariffs. We fondly call it Delta. And this is in collaboration with the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center. It is a public database of 50 plus approved and pending contemporary utility rates and contracts for large loads. There is a very wonky data set to go along with it. I would encourage everyone to check it out, especially in this current moment as across the industry, we are all looking for a clearer view of growth forecasts and how we strategically plan for grid infrastructure. And just to take one example from Delta, there's a pending transmission extension of facilities tariff proposed by Arkansas Electric Cooperative Corporation in front of the Arkansas PSC that really focuses on ensuring that this load growth moment does not have undue effects on ratepayers as a whole. So just wanted to highlight Delta. And then additionally wanted to highlight two other sort of SEPA resources as we think about technology opportunities here. First, earlier this year, SEPA released a new report on a new procurement model called distributed capacity procurement. This is also available online. And this is a model in which utilities plan, deploy, own, and manage customer-sited DERs based on where they can provide the most grid value and grid services.
DERs being?
Excuse me, distributed energy resources. Thank you for allowing me to not totally speak in acronyms all of the time.
This is an acronym paradise up here.
Indeed, indeed. And so just wanted to highlight sort of this new model, which is actually proposed and currently pending in front of the Minnesota PSC by Xcel Energy, the Minnesota, North Dakota, South
North Dakota, South Dakota operating company as their capacity connect proposal to build out 200 megawatts of a battery storage network across Minnesota by 2028. So to that point of short-term solutions and actions, and really looking to optimize that strategic location for grid capacity as a whole. And then finally, I would be remiss if I didn't add a couple other acronyms into this discussion, including virtual power plants or VPPs, and really the opportunity we have to think holistically about how we can leverage distribution grid assets to help alleviate congestion on the transmission level. So SEPA has a number of reports analyzing the different policy and regulatory actions that are currently at play across the country to incentivize virtual power plants. And would specifically just point to, say, the example of Green Mountain Power's energy storage system program. It's available to residential customers to lease 2 Powerwall batteries. Customers host this behind the meter energy storage, but then Green Mountain Power has the ability to operate the batteries intelligently by responding to real-time ISO New England grid signals and really leverage that customer-sided resource to, say, address peak demand periods across the broader grid. So again, just this opportunity to think about how we can use all the tools in the toolbox across our grid to meet the moment.
Thanks, Kate. So Peter, you gave us a little introduction to reconductoring and really conductoring, I think, as well. I think of advanced conductoring and advanced reconductoring as part of the grid enhancing technologies. What are the barriers? Why, if the efficiencies are there for advanced conductoring and reconductoring, aren't we doing more of that in the West or in other parts of the country?
Fortunately, our largest customers in the U.S. are in the West. So the West is definitely leading in the U.S. at least. To give you an idea, to build on Julia's point earlier, the first advanced conductors, we deployed them about a little bit over 20 years ago. So it's also about a 20-year-old technology. Today, we're the largest, as I mentioned, largest manufacturer in the world. We have about 125,000 miles around the world, less than 10,000, less than 10% in the U.S. But that 10,000 in the U.S. represents more advanced conductors than all of our competitors have elsewhere in the world. The challenge, and your question goes, why is it being deployed so aggressively around the rest of the world and it's not as aggressive, although it's changing in the U.S. with the recent incentives and the recent speed to power interest. It is growing. Frankly, the incentives are not aligned. So as I mentioned, one of the big advantages, of course, is what most people buy it for worldwide in the U.S. is for, and do advanced reconductoring, is to double capacity. But in the U.S., certainly generally with IOUs, the 30% efficiency advantage, which is a straight pass-through to the ratepayers, doesn't get a lot of attention, as you might imagine. What is getting attention now more is the wildfire risk, basically the lower sag. And one of the things that's kind of the deep, dark secret of the traditional conductors is they have a steel core. That steel core is much higher resistance than the aluminum. So basically, these conductors are heating up from the inside out. And some of the newest ones are running, I'm understanding some of the new ones with their operating temperatures, which is the coolest point on the conductor, it's at the outer edge, is like 250 degrees centigrade. When they're running at 250, the core could be running 350 degrees centigrade. So people are worried about, some of the things they're doing for wildfire mitigation now is have faster breakers, faster switches, so that you can actually cut the power before a line was to fall. Doesn't do you any good if a 350-degree core hits the ground. You're going to get a fire anyhow. The industry, the utilities in the West are starting to see those benefits, so it's being adopted. But basically, to go back to it, the incentives are misaligned. We actually do relatively better with public utilities because their voters are also their ratepayers, so they're a little more interested in the efficiency.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, just to sum up some of the barriers, I think education is a big one. If the utilities or the public service commissions don't know how to value these additional benefits from advanced conductors or GETs, then they don't necessarily emerge in the plans. The other piece is the incentives. So for GETs, they're just such a small investment that they don't hit the balance sheet. This is not going to be an executive level agenda item, right? And then the engineers are only responsible for reliability. If reliability gets bad, that's when they get in trouble. So they have no incentive to try something new, even if it would, like on paper, improve reliability. Say we have the tools in our toolbox. Let's stop there. So we're stuck between the incentives and inertia, and then we're working also on the education to make sure people understand. No, actually, this will make your job easier, your reliability job, as well as unlocking these costs or these benefits and savings.
Thank you. I was going to stay with you, Peter, because you mentioned the Speed to Power initiative. Talk about how advanced reconductoring and advanced conductoring supports the Speed to Power initiative by the administration.
So building on what Julie described earlier, you can reconductor a line in about 8 to 18 months. So that's compared to new, is I think you, for the panels earlier, new line, basically you get transmission 3 different ways. You can build new lines, you can rebuild existing lines, or you reconductor. New lines are 10 to 20 years, 4 times the cost of reconductoring. Rebuilding, which generally means you build taller and bigger towers, and then you may use an advanced conductor, or you may not use, you may use a bigger and taller tower, so you could use more of the traditional conductor. That takes about anywhere from 3 to about 10 years. And then advanced reconductoring could be done in 18 to 18 months. To give you an example, advanced reconductoring could be done live. In 2016, our third largest customer, which is AEP, particularly their AEP West, which is Texas, they won the EEI project, transmission project of the year, for a 240-mile long line on the southern Texas coast, in an area that's prone to hurricanes, that they did reconductoring live over about 18 months. And they did it that way because ERCOT told them when they first started looking at adding capacity to that line, yeah, we think we can let you take an outage 5 years from now and reconductoring. But by the way, or rebuilding your lines. But by the way, if we get out 5 years out 5 years, and we can't let you do it, then we won't allow you to do it. So they were looking at all their solutions. To go back to the famous old Winston Churchill quote, democracy is the worst form of government except for every other form of government that's been tried. Well, basically, in this case, it was they went to advanced reconducting when they looked at every other possible solution that would get them where they needed to be, and they realized it was the only way to go. And it was a tremendously successful project, saved a lot of money, saved a lot of time.
Can I jump in again? Okay. I think something I want to emphasize is this handful of great stories we have of GETS deployments in the US over the last 20 years. They come from either two things. One is a story like Peter's, where they had no other option. They needed capacity tomorrow, and then they were turning over every stone. And then the other option is there's a really motivated person at the utility who is willing to take a risk and try something new, and then get some glory out of it as well. But those don't scale, right? You can't wait until you're you've exhausted all other options, or you've got some young upstart ready to make a change. We need, the reason we're talking to policymakers all the time is we need the changes to be structural. If we stay on the path that we've been on with these technologies, I think in 20 years, they'll be in every planner's toolbox. But we can go a lot faster, and we have to go a lot faster. So that's why we're here.
That's right. So Sarah, so much of this does come down to regulated utilities, and unregulated, but and utility commissions. So how does a utility commission know whether a utility has rigorously considered all of the advanced transmission technologies that are available in their own permitting process in front of the regulators?
Yeah, great question. I do think this whole process starts and ends with regulators and even with politicians encouraging their regulators to do the right thing here. And so we need regulators to encourage utilities to get over that initial learning curve. It's very doable. These utilities are doing these technologies all over the US. And encouraging them to do that despite them, not being expensive, and you can't really rate base them. They're still good. And then the utility has to take that directive and do a really rigorous and transparent analysis. This is what we looked at on our whole system. We identified maybe a couple hotspots where these would be really useful, and then come back to your commission and propose that to them. And then the commission's role is to ask, well, how did you do that? Let me look at this transparent methodology. And did you follow industry best practices? One of the things that we published this year in association with Quanta Technologies, who's an industry leader in transmission planning and interconnection, is they laid out a whole report on best practices for integrating these technologies into all three main planning portions of the utility planning process: integrated resource planning, transmission planning, and interconnection planning. We have the best practices. We have experts with guidance. And so we can then look as a regulator, let's compare those things. Was it a rigorous analysis? If not, go back to the drawing board. And if so, the regulator can be very confident that that utility is making the best use of consumer dollars in the existing system that they can.
Point to make on that, just by coincidence, the EPC firm on the South Texas AEP project for the live reconducting was Quanta.
And quickly, you can rate base these technologies. You just won't make a ton of money, but for the utilities in the room. Yeah. That was...
So, Julia, this is a Western Governors meeting, and I'd like to ask you, how do governors get involved in this? What's the role that a governor could play in trying to ensure that this kind of grid modernization, grid enhancing happens?
Yeah, great. Great question. I'm going to start at a high level, a strategic level. I think it's, and this was brought up yesterday, it's really valuable for governors to set a vision and a pathway and a roadmap and bring in the utilities and the stakeholders and the consumer advocates, et cetera. Just get everyone together and say, is this the direction we're rowing in? And point to everyone and say, yes, 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 right? I think that's a really important role for governors, and I think it's a relatively light lift. Just convening in the among stakeholders and a different form that can take as a task force. The Oregon governor led a clean technologies task force, I think, that recommended gets. So some examples of that. Then you can go deeper into the details where in states where governors are allowed to coordinate with the PUCs. I know sometimes there's a firewall, but work with them on how their oversight can ensure that gets are being considered. And one important thing to look for is whether there is a block to, quote, right sizing, aka upgrading your existing infrastructure compared to just, now that we're in this asset replacement cycle, a lot of transmission lines are 60 years old. Is it way easier for the utility to just put in the same technology again than it is to upgrade? That's a problem. And I think in many states, it is a lot easier for the utility to get approval to just keep what they already have than go to the next step. So that's an important check to do. Then there's also economic development organizations that often are led by the governor of the state energy office or state economic development office. I think there's opportunities within those to potentially push for finding additional headroom on the grid proactively and saying, okay, what can we do here? Can we put in a new manufacturer on the grid? Is there anywhere where there's space for this? And the governor and the utility working together to find that economic development.
Yes, I ran this center at CSU. We really started out to work with governors 14 years ago, wound up developing a Clean Energy Legislator Academy because legislators are also part of it. And so just thinking this panel here would be perfect to be in front of the National Council of State Legislators, NCSL, because legislators are vital to this conversation when you're talking about what governors can do, what PUCs can do. Legislators can often be the initiator.
Our team has talked to NCSL audiences twice in the last week, so we're there.
There you go.
To add to your comment on what governors can do, one of the more interesting things is with the IIJA, when it was passed a few years ago, it put the state energy offices for the first time on the other side of the meter. They actually have a role now in transmission planning. And so it's a kind of a win-win because one, they're involved in transmission planning now, but the state energy office has always had a very significant interest in efficiency. So they actually like the efficiency story for GETs and advanced conductors.
Just segue there a bit. In 2009, I was the governor of Colorado, and somebody, I don't know what company and who they were, but they were introduced to me by a person who I know pretty well. He's Steve Farber, he's since passed, but they had a transmission line with a fiber optic core. And I'm thinking it was really early on in the process, but it's probably part of the 20-year problem, right? That we don't have that everywhere.
We actually do. We actually do have a version. We have something called InfoCore, which has fiber optics, which is designed to validate the integrity of the line at any point. And we're not talking about it as publicly now, but we actually are developing, and it'll be announced fairly quickly publicly, a line that has fiber optics in to act as a data center. So basically,
Yeah.
you get gets built into the line.
That's great. Kate, the last question before we go to audience questions. How can data and digital tools improve grid situational awareness, outage response, and integration of DERs, distributed energy resources? And think about the West, where we have wildfires, and the interplay between the grid and wildfires is part of that situational awareness and outage responses.
Yeah, absolutely. And SEPA's actually doing a fair amount of work with its members, specifically on wildfire mitigation and wildfire resilience. So earlier this year, hosted a 5-part webinar series specifically on wildfire mitigation and resilience from different perspectives, right? Whether that's the technology pilot piece, whether that's public safety power shutoffs, PSPSs, yet another acronym. And we'll be shortly actually releasing a report focused on sort of key utility and regulatory actions as we think about wildfire resilience and grid resilience more broadly. So certainly on that data and digital tools piece, you know, we are seeing a number of technology pilots to help improve situational awareness on both the transmission and distribution assets, especially related to extreme weather events and wildfire events. Companies like Rhizome, TechnoSilva, Pano AI, and others are deploying these technologies today actively to address that situational awareness piece. Additionally, I'll throw another acronym out here, DERMS, which is Distributed Energy Resource Management Systems, sort of a mouthful, but an opportunity to leverage technology to really enable new kinds of resource management and new paradigms for grid operations. SEPA partnered with APS, Excel, and Energy Hub on a report entitled Decoding DERMS, again, to get back to that education and translation piece, both across our industry and for policymakers and regulators. And then finally, I would just highlight obviously the AI and machine learning pilots that we're seeing, whether that's PJM to enhance planning and interconnection processes, or CAISO to help actually actively manage power outage coordination. An important component here to think about how we can leverage the digital tools to help enhance grid situational awareness and resilience overall.
That's great. There's not a generating energy resource management system, is there? Because that'd be germs. And that would be easier to remember than just DERMS. But now that's another acronym that I just learned about. This has been a fascinating experience for me, educational. Okay, we're going to go to questions for people in the audience. Questions?
Is it on? Okay, sorry. Thanks for the discussion. This is Mike Getz with Renewable Northwest. Yeah, I really agree a lot of what you all said, but especially the point about making sure that the Public Utility Commission work is kind of done accurately. And I think that requires some, you know, reforms to integrated resource planning processes, but also the way that you know, utilities look at these kind of investments. And I know in some jurisdictions, we're starting to look at performance-based rate making incentives and potentially, you know, allowing for a rate of return on investments in GETs. And that's something that in Washington and Oregon, we're starting to look at. But I'm curious if you all have thoughts on like best practices for incentivizing GETs and maybe some other jurisdictions that are starting to look at this.
Yeah, I'll say one thing is for helping public utility commissions do their work, the Department of Energy recently announced doubling down on their technical assistance programs. I think if you're a state commission and you say, hey, I'm trying to get speed to power, I'm trying to find out if my transmission grid is giving me what I needed to give me and my utility plan is corresponding to that, I think that's something the Department of Energy would love to hear from state commissions about and potentially support. In terms of performance-based rate making, there are a few models around the world that have worked. And some of those are a return on equity adder. So sort of straightforward, if you get this much better performance or, you know, hit these milestones for interconnecting new generation or reducing costs, whatever the goal is, you can get this adder. Another approach is a shared savings approach. If a utility can demonstrate, hey, under traditional solution sets, we would have spent, X $100 million. Instead, we're spending X single-digit $1 million. Then there can be a framework for rewarding them for innovating towards that consumer savings. So Watt has worked on both of those. Happy to get into details offline.
Okay, yes.
And to add additionally to this on the sort of coordinated comprehensive system planning piece, SEPA recently supported Washington Utility and Transportation Commission, which is the public service commission in Washington state, on their integrated system planning docket, which is actually looking to coordinate the planning for both electric and natural gas systems to align those, easy systems, but to really, to your point, looking to coordinate the various planning requirements across the system as a whole. And then finally, I would just offer for those of you who perhaps aren't aware of this initiative, there is a national standard practice manual for benefit cost analysis of distributed energy resources. It's called the NSPM for DERs, more acronyms. But the reason I bring it up is it is looking at how to take a more comprehensive approach to benefit cost analysis for, in this case, utility investments in DERs. But I think that there's actually a lot of parallels here in terms of some of the comments I've heard today around the opportunity to think more broadly about the value of transmission and articulating that and translating that to public service commissions and policymakers. So this particular manual, goes into how do you actually quantify and identify the value of resilience, depending upon the particular asset or set of assets and technologies that you're looking to invest in. So just food for thought as we think about the opportunity to sort of learn from complementary work.
One of the easy ones to do would be to encourage public utility commissions. If a utility ever comes in and wants to do a rebuild where they're raising and or widening the towers, question whether that's absolutely necessary. Could you just do reconductoring because it's a lot faster and a lot cheaper? More significantly even now, because understanding is with the steel tariffs, the cost of towers have gone up like 60% in the last couple of years. So if you can avoid rebuilding a tower or making a tower taller or wider, you'll save a lot of money and a lot of time.
Thanks, Peter. Other questions?
Hi, this is Tyler Farrell. I'm also at RMI, one of Sarah's colleagues. But my question around superabundance is we want to get power online quickly. And in the West, we have a lot of processes, integrated resource plans, Western transmission planning, and all these things happen on a annual, every 2 years, every 5 years basis, but we need this power today. So how do we change our processes, or do we need new processes to get these things online tomorrow? And not in 10 years from now.
Anybody want to answer your colleague's question, Sarah? Julia.
I have my eyes on SPP, which is just teasing at this point, an intermediate planning process, which is going to look 1 month out, quarterly, and then I think near term. I don't remember the final stage, what the timeline is, but that's really exciting to see them kind of breaking it down into that time frame that is just kind of under the transmission planning time frame. So I think additional processes do make sense. I say GETS have been around for a long time. DLR that's available now is a lot better than DLR that was available in 2012, which I think Rocky Mountain Power and other Western utilities tried out. So I think there's a lot of value in having utilities make sure that potentially their near-term planning processes right now are reliability only. Let's add economics and add headroom for load growth into those processes. And I think especially for that last one, utilities have an incentive to start doing that. But having the support of the community, stakeholder community, and beyond helps them make those changes.
To echo your point there, the load growth, data centers and AI facilities, they can be built in 2 years or less. And the only thing that matches up on increasing capacity at that time or gets an advanced reconductoring. That's the only thing that kind of matches up the timeline that the data centers. Some of you may be aware we have a joint venture or a business relationship with Google, and Google's willing to go in there if they have in an area where they have a data center or where they're looking to build a data center. If there's a transmission constraint, they're willing to underwrite some of the cost of reconductoring, and they're willing to provide engineering resources and training resources to get it done quickly. That's how important speed to power is to some of these big hyperscalers.
Okay, good. Sarah?
Yeah, I would maybe bring it back to what you were saying, Bill. It requires this vision to be set from governors, legislators, and the regulators. If we want to make something happen in 2 years and we have the political willpower to do that and all the technologies to do that, we can make it happen. We can totally make it happen. We just need to have that collective willpower work together.
So just to end up, I did write an op-ed that got published in the New York Times after the big beautiful bill basically said we should speed up these processes, to your point, just to take advantage of the tax credits. It's going to cost consumers a lot of rate increases if you don't have the tax credits built in, especially in a state where you have emissions goals that the utilities have to meet, and they're baked into law. So you still have to meet the emissions goals, then you no longer have the tax credit, and people are going to lose out. So Governor Polis wrote an executive order. We mentioned that in the editorial, but Governor of California, Governor of Oregon, and others, I think it was the Governor of Illinois, they had all done different things to say, let's accelerate that. So XL goes before the commission and says, let's collapse phase 1 and phase 2 of the integrated resource plan. And let's get an answer to this maybe by the end of this year to be able to take advantage of the tax credit that would give you that the PTC and the ITC by July 4th of 2026. We'll see if it happens, but I think there's been some urgency around that because of the big beautiful bill. So I think with that, we'll end, and I want you to give these folks a great round of applause. Thank you. That was a wonderful panel.
All right, we'll take a quick 10-minute break before we kick off our last session of the workshop.
Check one, check one. Check, 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 check. 1, 2.
Proceed or move their conversations into the lobby area. Much appreciated.
Check.
All right. I'm very excited to kick off our final panel session of this workshop, and one I'm quite looking forward to getting into. So we just talked about some of the physical modernization efforts that need to be done to the grid. Grid security also plays a big role in facilitating transmission. So today our panelists will talk about some of the implications for grid security. I will turn it over to our panelists for introductions, and then we can get into some of the discussion. We'll start with Chris.
Hi, thanks. My name's Chris Sott. I'm the Director of Security for Critical Infrastructure for Power Engineers, member of WSP. My career spans back to the late 90s when I joined the United States Marine Corps, and I was a power generation distribution expert for the first half of that portion of my career. And the latter half, we focused after the war started to kick off, changed our direction and started doing a little bit of war planning. So my job then became to figure out how to destroy utilities, which was actually a really fun job. I got out and got my engineering degree, spent the next 7 years designing, helping with plans, processes, procedures, and technology for critical infrastructure. And then the next 10 years I spent in corporate security for a fairly sizable utility in the Pacific Northwest. And now I'm with Power Engineers. So that's my background.
Thank you.
And thank you for your service on the Marine Corps, even though it was to blow up utilities. So, and my name is Dwayne Hiley. I serve as CEO for Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association. If Bill Ritter was still in the room, he'd say Tri-State's a very poorly areas. What I heard you say once, and I've adopted it as mine, is Tri-State is a very poorly named cooperative because we serve in 4 states. So it's our 40 member utilities that buy from us are in Nebraska, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. All of it public power, either public power districts or cooperatives. If you look at the footprint of Tri-State's members, we serve the wholesale energy and transmit it to them, and then they sell it retail in their local communities. Again, nonprofit member-owned cooperatives or public power districts, all of them.
about 200,000 square miles of service territory. So it's bigger than the state of California. It's probably the largest utility you've never heard of. And the reason for that is it's only about 1.5 million people that are served because it's some of the most rugged and remote areas of the American West. So we get the privilege to serve some of these beautiful, beautiful areas that are really hard to get to. And so I'm proud to be with you this morning. I also serve as co-chair of the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council. And probably the reason why I'm on this panel is to talk about grid security. The Electric Subsector Coordinating Council is the principal liaison between the federal government and electric utilities. I'll say more about that when I come to my remarks.
All right, good morning. I'm Nate Gleason. I'm the program leader for cyber and critical infrastructure at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. So we are a Department of Energy national laboratory. Program that I lead actually serves across a number of different federal departments. So we support Department of Energy, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense, and the intelligence community. And focus a lot on the issues of critical infrastructure. And when we talk about critical infrastructure, number one among the infrastructure sectors is always energy. So a big, strong focus on energy sector. Two big things that we work to support United States government in, both focused around this concept of gray zone threats. So that is the sub-kinetic conflict that we've been in with Russia and China for many, many years now. We focus on the concept of infrastructure deterrence. The idea is that adversaries can hold our critical energy infrastructure at risk in order to prevent the United States from executing certain functions or compel it to do certain things. And this idea of energy dominance, the idea that we can use energy to achieve our national security goals. So our program is focused on creating technologies, deploying systems, running operations that enhance and further U.S. goals in both those two areas.
Great. Well, I think as we've heard over the past couple days, the themes of collaboration and partnership are really central to a lot of these efforts with transmission. So I'd like to turn it over to Dwayne to talk a little bit about some of the efforts going on with the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council, what that looks like, what that engagement's been like, and yeah, what can you tell us there?
Okay, so thank you for that. So if you think back to 9/11, following 9/11, the federal government said we need to have a better way of getting information and sharing it with industry and government, detecting threats, preparing for threats, and responding to threats in a coordinated fashion. And hence they set up a bunch of coordinating councils on 16 different critical security areas. So areas such as healthcare, telecommunications, the financial sector, the water sector, electric utilities, so the electric sector, the oil and gas sector. Each of those is represented with a coordinating council. I serve as co-chair of the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council, so that represents the electric utility part of the threat matrix. And I serve as a co-chair representing the electric cooperative part of the business. One of my co-chairs is Pedro Pizarro, who's the CEO of Edison International, so Southern California Edison, representing the investor-owned utilities, and then Tom Kent, who's the CEO for Nebraska Public Power District, representing state and municipal utility public power. So all the sectors are represented. And then there's about 30 electric utility CEOs. All of us have security clearances so that we can meet in classified space with the federal government. And the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council then acts as the principal liaison between government and industry, so we can have conversations in classified space about threats to the grid. Now, our mission is to prepare for and respond to threats. So not just cybersecurity, but also physical threats and weather. So you think severe weather, hurricanes or wildfires. We will be engaging advance of those events with a team that talks with our government partners at DOE, NSA, White House, FERC, whoever we need to be engaged with for whatever issue is happening. And then we can have those daily calls throughout that event until it's successfully mitigated. But the same thing with cybersecurity. And the threats have been only escalating in the time that I've been co-chair since about 2012. And it just kind of gets worse every year. Now we're not just dealing with people who are hackers in their basement, but we're dealing with sophisticated nation states that employ, literally in the case of China, hundreds of thousands of workers who come to work every day. Their mission is to do what Chris did. How can we destroy the utilities or have the ability to destroy the utilities and in a way that is effective, even without maybe launching a single bomb? And so you've read a lot about the different kinds of threats. I can say, based on the briefings I've received, we should take them very, very seriously. Foreign-made equipment that's built in areas that are our enemies likely contains threats, some discovered and some undiscovered. So just be very, very conscious of supply chain. There's the whole China-Taiwan thing. I'm sure our co-panelists are going to talk a lot about preparing for 2027, where China has actually stated, in the event of an invasion of Taiwan, they might want to disable some of United States critical infrastructure in advance of that. Now, that could occur as early as 2027 per the Chinese government's official plans, okay? So it's something to take extremely seriously. We have nation states, people who get up every morning with their job, how can I hack in the electric grid? How can I plant credentials where I can stay dormant and become active? And then how do we work as the electric subsector to take care of that? We have a couple of tools. One is the Information Sharing and Analysis Center. We call it the ISAC. Now, we're not the only one with an ISAC. Financial services has an ISAC. Telecommunications has an ISAC. But the idea is to collect threat information so the government knows certain things and industry knows certain things, but we don't know how to share that with one another. And the ISAC is one of the ways that happens. So within the ISAC, which again is classified space, industry can report to government, and we have a number of automated monitoring systems on internet firewalls across the utilities in this nation, so that it can be scanning for bad things happening. That gets sent to the ISAC, where then they can connect the dots and say, we see a coordinated attack occurring maybe at Tri-State, also occurring on the East Coast, also occurring in Los Angeles. This looks like it's coming from a government, a foreign government, and so they can connect the dots and then declassify the information sufficiently to share it with industry. So they don't want to say, well, we got a listening device in the Chinese president's house. I don't know what, I'm just making that up, by the way. But they're not going to share their methods of retrieving this information, but they might say, utilities, be on alert for maybe malware that's in a particular kind of equipment. We're not going to tell you how we know. We just want you to go look. Or maybe you need to check for this. So that's the ISAC. The ISAC is the Information Sharing and Analysis Center. Most utilities are members of that. Many state governments have hooks into that as well. It's a good thing to be engaged with. The other tool, another tool, is ETAC, Electricity Threat Analysis Center, which is hosted at the National Lab here in Colorado, here in Denver. Which lab? I'm just blanked on the name. Enroll, thank you. Thank you for that. So at the ETAC, again, in classified space, government analysts can look at threat information with trained utility experts from the utilities who also have a security clearance and say, we're seeing this thing happen. Is this a threat or not? Maybe it's not, maybe it's not a big deal. Or maybe it actually is a big deal because the engineer knows if you do that, that could be very, very bad. And then that enables the government to prepare a response appropriate, perhaps share information with the ISAC again for dissemination to the utilities. I'd say maybe there is a third tool that we all need to talk about, which is the grid threat exercises. This November, we'll be doing something we call GridX. It's kind of like a Super Bowl, and I know not as exciting maybe to some, but it's because it's so similar, we name it with Roman numerals. So we're now up to GridX XVII or something, 8, I think it is. Every other year we do a nationwide exercise with, in this case, it will be not just hundreds, possibly over 1,000 utilities engaged simultaneously in a threat exercise where we suppose some bad thing has happened. It could be hurricane, it could be national disaster, but oftentimes there's an element of cyber risk threat in the exercise. And then we do the desktop kind of, here's move 1, this just happened, how would you respond, utilities? Here's move 2, this just happened, how would you respond? And we partner with our state government and local government authorities and safety management agencies, FBI, sheriff's departments, as many as can play, the better, because we learn something every time. And we learn the weaknesses. Like, for example, many years ago, okay, a bad thing just happened. What are you gonna do? Well, I'm gonna call my federal partner. Well, what if the cell phones are down? What if the electricity's been out for 20 hours and the cell towers no longer have their backup power supply? Now what are you gonna do? So I just say that's an important tool in our toolbox. And those three are things that happen at the ESCC, and we can talk further about how the states can engage with those. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the overview. And I think certainly a lot of topics that we'll be diving a little deeper into throughout this session. So I think, it's no secret, and we've heard a lot about how much the grid has been changing in the past, so many years, and it's constantly evolving. So I guess whether those threats are cyber related or more physical threats, how are you sort of identifying them, identifying priority areas for strength and security efforts, and how has just those threats evolved on the grid?
I'll start if you don't mind. So most construction companies have taken a safety approach, right? Make sure you send your colleagues and your coworkers home safe and healthy the same way they came to work that day. And I really think that we need to institute in adjacent to that a security way of life, right? A security policy globally. I'll give you one example. I was working with the utility some time back, and they hired an organization to come in and do a penetration test, which is, they come in and test their cyber efforts, security, and also their physical security efforts. And to their credit, this particular utility had a phenomenal cyber team, absolutely phenomenal. But as we like to be friendly folks. There was some social engineering that took place in this particular ordeal. So they picked a location where all of the employees like to hold doors open for each other. And they came in wearing a hard hat, safety vest, and a clipboard. And they walked around the whole facility. And one person asked that penetration expert what they were doing on site. And he said, "Oh, I'm here to improve the company's Wi-Fi. I was hired by so-and-so over at corporate." And they just said, "Oh, great, our Wi-Fi here is terrible." And so this person walked around, found a couple of hotel stations that were shared by multiple employees, and instituted a USB device on an open port, and then walked to a different portion of the building and instituted another device on an open network port. And for the next however many weeks, it just sat there and listened and sniffed and just pulled information, usernames, passwords, and that's how they got in. That's how they instituted their attempted attack. So, as great as it is to hold the door open for your colleagues and your coworkers, at least ask, say, "Hey, do you have any ID? I don't recognize you. Maybe you're new here, or maybe you're visiting for the day." Another great way of approaching that is wearing visible credentials, right? If the whole entire organization does that, that's your very first line of defense in ensuring that a bad actor doesn't make their way into your facility.
Very much the human is the weak point in the security chain.
Yeah. So I'd want to say I'm in violent agreement with everything my fellow panelists have said on this. I want to foot stomp something Dwayne said earlier on in his remarks. One of the big things that's changed over the last 15 years or so with regard to security of the grid is you are no longer defending against random attackers, people who want to do this for fun. Southern California Edison, we work with them a lot. They're one of the most capable, most forward-leaning utilities that we deal with, but it is not a fair fight for Southern California Edison to go up against China and the entire resources of the state of China, or Russia. What we focus on, when we're thinking about dealing with these nation-state level threats to the power grid, the idea that you're going to build a really strong perimeter around your system and just keep the adversaries out is not realistic. So as a nation state, they have a number of different attack vectors at their disposal, whether it be network intrusions, insider threats, physical compromise, close access operations, supply chain operations. They will be able to get in. And so what we advocate is taking a layered approach to every step, making it as difficult as possible for the adversary to achieve their objective. You're not going to stop them, but make it as difficult as possible. The framework that we follow, we call immune infrastructure, a 4-layered framework. Really brief explanation of it is layer 1, understand your system, understand where your vulnerabilities are, understand what your system is. One of the things we do is we can put our bad guy hats on and say, well, China wants to achieve this particular objective in this region. Maybe they want to disrupt operations at a key port. Here's the ways they might be able to attack your system system in order to do that. If we were going to do that, here's how we would attack it. That helps us identify where the targets are, where the vulnerabilities are. Layer two, do your best to keep the adversary out. Just because we're not going to succeed doesn't mean you don't try. So that involves, assuring the software that you put on your system, assuring the hardware, the devices you put in your system. Again, if you buy a Chinese device, you're inviting China into your system. If you buy an American device that uses Chinese parts, you're inviting China into your system. We have lots of stories on that. Layer three, make sure you're looking at your system, monitoring your IT, your OT, so you can detect and respond when there are intrusions in that system. And it's good to look for signatures and known adversary TTPs that'll help you find most of the threats that are out there. But what we really care about are what are those really subtle things that our adversaries have put in our system and are just waiting for the right time to use them. And then layer four, recognize that layers 1, 2, and 3 are going to make the adversary's life more difficult, but the adversary is still going to win. So design your system so that you can operate through compromise. There's many ways to take advantage of that, particularly as the grid becomes more and more distributed. That distributed nature can be a vulnerability, but if you architect the system and you plan properly, the distributed nature actually also helps you build resilience into the system.
If I could jump in on that a little bit. So that distributed nature, it's important for us when we're working with our state partners, state government partners, to help us understand what's most critical to you. So we do have a program with the federal government where we know, for example, particular defense facilities extremely critical. They don't have to tell us why, but we need to know so we can make sure that that electrical substation is more protected, not just cyber-wise, but also physical-wise from like kinetic attacks. So we can put concrete walls up or, things to discourage a RPG kind of attack. But we need to know where it's critical. Same with state government. If you got a particular facility that's extremely crucial, have you had a conversation with your electric supplier to say, can you guarantee me that this one won't go down? I mean, because we can't protect everything. There's too many miles of line out there, but we can make sure that the areas that are most critical are protected. I just encourage you to be in dialogue with your local utility partners.
And I'll add to that, test often, test frequently, right? You always want to look for gaps. Security is an evolving world. Technology changes rapidly, right? So bugs come out that were never previously used before. And if you don't have the resources within your organization, look for opportunities outside. There are experts out there.
In terms of threat detection or identification, how quickly are you able to do that? Are there technologies or other things that could be more supportive to help you be more nimble and responsive?
So I'll say, I don't know if I'd say how quickly in terms of, gosh, we can catch it at machine speed. That's obviously the goal, but there's different tiers. Certainly when you're talking about known threats, signatures, the cybersecurity industry is very advanced in being able to detect things like that well. We aren't focusing our energy on that. Like I was said briefly before, we're focusing our energy in detecting the things that no one has seen before, the stuff that's going to give you the really bad day when you really don't need it. One of the most important things, well, maybe I should start with a baseline. The most important thing to enable that is actually monitor your systems. I've been on other forums where we've been talking about grid security and with Rob Lee from Dragos, and one of the things he loves to say is actually look at what's happening on your OT systems. That's step number one. But step number two, there are a lot of government programs that utilities can participate in that allow for collective monitoring, collective defense. Working together as a sector is really beneficial. We talked about ETAC, hosted by NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. I'll make sure to give them their shout out. But a lot of us participate in that as well. But other programs that are really good for helping with detection. So Department of Homeland Security has a program called Cyber Sentry. In the Cyber Sentry program right now, there's about 40 partners around the country. What these partners have agreed to do is let Homeland Security install fairly intrusive network monitors on their system, so they get full data on the OT system. What that allows us to do is take that full access to the data, take our access to the intelligence community and the capabilities that we know the adversary has or wants to build or is talking about building, and the computational resources that national laboratories can bring, the artificial intelligence, machine learning, high performance computing resources to develop ways to detect these very, very subtle threats. One of the stories on this that I've told, again, a number of times before, is a success in that program of detecting surveillance cameras that are placed on IT and OT networks. I won't go into the full story now, but there's a particular Chinese company that makes these cameras. They market them to critical infrastructure. They're very capable cameras. They cost about half as much as their competitors. And they provide China a backdoor into your system. So through the Cyber Sentry program, we're able to detect and identify that this was happening, identify the cameras, identify their behavior, but more importantly, create a fingerprint for those cameras from the data we got from those utilities that we could then pass to some of those larger information sharing organizations and give people playbooks for here's how you go and look on your own system for this. So that's why participation in those programs I think is so important.
And it also sounds kind of silly, but I've seen it so many times. Default usernames and passwords and administrator level passwords, especially when you hire a contractor to come in to commission a system or whatever. Oftentimes they like to have a service account on some of these devices. So hopefully your IT manager or director is asking these questions. And after that product has been handed over to the utility, they remove that and lock that stuff up.
I hate to share this example because it's not exactly relevant, but it kind of is. So my neighbor's dog got out the other day, but she was gone and it's wandering all over and we don't know what to do. And my other neighbor said, well, let's just try the garage door code. And I said, I don't know his garage door code. And he went 1, 2, 3, 4, boom. And it opened. And he said, every house that was built in this neighborhood, they put the same code in. And apparently they haven't changed their code yet. And this is the example you're talking. It doesn't just happen in neighborhoods. It happens in big companies. And I can guarantee you right now, China's in some of your networks right now as a user with credentials, and you don't know they're there. But I promise you from the intelligence we've seen, they're in some of the systems, some of the state systems and some of the utility systems, even today. Sorry.
Yeah, the password thing, plus the takeaway that you can get in anywhere with a high-vis vest, I guess to that point, are there sort of institutional changes or workforce educational training opportunities that we can sort of instill in folks to help mitigate some of these risks?
Yeah, employee training and also contractor training. In my experience, it seems like the highest violators of security policy tends to be contractors and subcontractors. For one reason or another, they should really have the same training opportunities and mandates across the board. So that way they know what the policy and procedure is working in and around a utility's infrastructure. That's one of the main goals.
Yeah, the phishing attacks, we call them PHISH, phishing, are extremely profitable for the enemy because they work so well. And you get them on your cell phone now, but if our employees get an email, it's from me, looks like it's from me. I need you to reset your password, or here's the link, or they see an email that says your paycheck just didn't get deposited. So log in here and you can tell us what bank to send it to and give us your account numbers. And you'd just be amazed how many people will say, sure, I'll give you that information. And then the bad guys have whatever they need. But getting passwords the same way, it's just prevalent. And we do a little phishing test. So you said, what can you do? We send out fake phishing emails, and then when the employees click on them, they go, ha ha ha, you're really lucky, and you're not going to go to jail, and we're not going to discipline you, but you need to know you just clicked on a link that could have been bad and could have given the enemy credentials to our system. Every time we do this, we catch people. We have 40 board members, by the way, because we have, and you can imagine our board members there are farmers and ranchers, maybe not as sophisticated in the cyber world. And so we can usually find 1 or 2 of them who are willing to give their credentials.
Hey, I resemble that remark.
So just re-emphasizing it, I think as both of you did, basic cyber hygiene is super important. There are a number of guidelines that are published by various organizations. CISA's got critical security controls. I think the SANS Institute also talks about critical security controls that can help bring your system up to a baseline level of readiness. And I think having the workforce aware of this is super valuable. The other thing that I would add is a lot of times I think people can think, well, we're never going to be a target. No one cares about me. We're too small. That's not the case at all. When you think about what the objective is of some of these actors, they want to cause chaos. They want to disrupt power, sure, but there may be a particular facility, a particular target that they want to cause chaos for. And it just so happens that a lot of our critical defense facilities around the country that are crucially important to our national security, they don't sit in downtown Denver. They sit out in rural areas. They are served by smaller utilities that don't have those resources, and so those guys, everyone needs to understand you could be the target.
Yeah, and Dwayne, you mentioned it a little bit earlier, and Nate, you really emphasized some of the points, knowing and understanding where your systems come from, who's inside them. Can you talk a little bit about some of the supply chain implications that might affect how we source some of these materials or technologies, and how we can ensure that, we're in charge of who's inside our systems?
I thought the question was aimed towards you, Dwayne.
Oh, so the supply, so we've been working a lot with our federal partners on the supply chain question, but sometimes there's just so little they can share with us that they've seen something implanted in a device. If they share it too much, then the foreign adversary knows that they know. And so there's this big tension on what can you share and what can you not share, so you don't compromise the methods by which this information is being collected. Again, the tapping Xi Jinping's phone number or whatever, and where that came from. So there's a tension between us. One meeting we were in with our federal partners, they said, we've seen some things and we think you should be careful with your supply chain. And I said, okay, can you be more specific? And they said, well, how about you just Google it? Like, Google it. This is the federal government's plan. Now, we've progressed since then, okay? But and now they're sharing certain things, but still it's very difficult to get like a whitelist or a blacklist. I'd say this is the general guidance is if it's made in a foreign country or has parts from a foreign country, it's very likely to be bad, especially if it's coming from China. Do not put Chinese routers. Don't use Russian malware detection software. Certain things like that. You can share more on that end. It's just a scary world.
Yeah, I think it gets even more complicated when we think about the devices that we buy. They have a label on the outside, but what's inside that case, who knows? So that's the importance of, there's a couple of projects that are going on in the federal government to help people understand what it is they're buying. The term they use is SBOM, and not to get caught by the acronym, please, software bill of materials, or HBOM, the hardware bill of materials, tools for understanding what are the actual ingredients that go into that device you bought. When I was talking about the cameras before, the particular offending camera that we found was made by a company called Dahua. That is a known bad actor, but there were over 100 other companies, some of whom are very, very well-known, U.S.-based companies that sell that exact same device, where they basically buy the equipment from Dahua and they put their label on the outside. So just looking at the label on the outside doesn't help. And then software gets even more complicated because, again, company A builds a piece of equipment. The software, the firmware for that equipment, they don't write every line of code of that. They use libraries and components that come from other places. So being able to understand what your ingredients are, it goes a long way to helping you understand just how much risk you're taking on with that.
We talked a little bit about some of the federal programs and critical federal opportunities. I was wondering, at the state level, are there opportunities for coordination among states or partnerships between states and counties or local governments that can be strong and supportive here?
I think the GridX, I'll just, sorry, jump in front of you there. The GridX is a great opportunity that's coming up in November. And I think most of the state governments are engaged in this already. Just make sure that you really are engaged in it. It's an opportunity to test our responses and our communications tools with one another. In one of the previous GridX, we modeled loss of telecom, and I think it's very important to think about what you actually do. We do these tabletop exercises, but if all the lights went out right now and you lost your cell phone, what are you going to do? Reality. And what's your state agency going to do in reality? As an example, we had a program. I used to work in Arkansas as a CEO of an organization there, and we had a similar issue with the utility communicating with the state government. And they said, in the case of a really bad event, you're going to go to this Air Force base, which has a SCIF, a secure compartmentalized information facility, where we can have classified conversations about what's going on. Okay, let's practice that. Instead of just saying that's what we're going to do, let's try to actually do it. So when I showed up at the Air Force base, supposedly all cleared, couldn't get through the gate because I didn't have the right kind of auto registration for my car. Okay, it's little stuff like that. Can you really get through the gate? And if that bad thing really happened, would I have been able to get into the SCIF to have that conversation? Same thing with state police headquarters. I'm told, oh, there's a SCIF at state police headquarters. If everything goes to hell, if everything goes bad, go there. So I go there and I'm like, all the doors are locked. I don't have a card to get through. Am I supposed to just knock on the door and say, hey, state police, would you let me in? There's a grid crisis happening right now. So I think the exercise part of this is so easy to just say, well, here's what we'll do on a desktop exercise and not actually exercise the exercise. Let's practice. Let's say, could we all gather in the SCIF or in the wherever the state emergency response room is? Let's do it and see if it works. Just the simple stuff like that can really trip up an emergency response.
Great point, Dwayne. What I would like to see is stronger, harsher repercussions for bad actors. I'll give you a really good example. I was working with a client, longtime client, and they had a lone wolf attack, physical attack at one of their substations where this person showed up and fired a weapon multiple rounds into this substation. That individual was arrested and was prosecuted. Yay, great, right? You'd all think so? I followed up on that. That individual was sentenced to 5 years probation. So my question is, what happened there? It was raised to the federal level, and at prosecution time, this particular judge made the determination that there was no loss of product and there was no loss of life. Therefore, not a big issue. That's a punch in the gut for security individuals and law enforcement. These utilities spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and in some cases millions of dollars at a single installation to ensure the protection of our infrastructure, to make sure the lights stay on, you're staying warm or cool depending on the climate. And when these bad actors go in there and try and disrupt that and they get a slap on the wrist, it really takes the wind out of the sails of these security professionals. So that's what I would like to see.
I think one thing we've seen from our sort of from a distance perspective about state partnerships is that there's opportunity for improvement in how states work with the utilities on security measures. In California, where Lawrence Livermore is, we've heard sort of opportunities for improvement on both sides. One is the Public Utilities Commission requires the utilities to release publicly lots of information about their systems. That information is super valuable for someone who wants to attack and disrupt their system. I think there's valid reasons for the state to want that information, but they're harming security by making that information available publicly. On the other side, we've seen utilities not want to really talk to the states about the real risks and their risk assessment, the vulnerabilities, because they think, well, it's none of their business. I don't want to tell them about this. And so they kind of hold the state at arm's distance. So the state doesn't understand those risks. I think if there were a little bit more, connection between the regulators and the utilities, and risk was seen as something that there needed to be this partnership to work together, I think we could have improved results.
I do want to give folks in the audience a chance to ask questions if there are any. Raise your hands.
Hi, thanks for this conversation. There's been a lot of conversation amongst you guys about our adversaries. What are some of the adversarial challenges that we face in the context of grid security when it comes to building out our transmission system?
So it takes too long, and we got to build so much of it. Right now, a transmission line can take anywhere from 7 to 15 years to build, and most of that is permitting. There's one in California that was just completed at 18 years, so it's old enough to vote, but it took that long to get it done. I started in 1982 in this business, so a long time ago. The very first job I had was to plan a transmission line in Southwest Missouri. Not exactly a really difficult place to build infrastructure, right? But 14 years later, that line was built. Okay, it's hard to get gratification in your job, first of all, if that's how long it takes to see fruit of your labor. But more importantly, at a time right now when the grid's moving so quickly and changing, so much change in the resources that are inputting into the grid. And so now it's coming from solar and wind more than it's coming from coal. That means different inputs. It means the transmission system has to be modified. But if it takes us 15 years to build a power line, we're certainly not going to be able to support an energy transition or greater resiliency and reliability. So I'd say working on permitting reform, we've been doing a lot of work with this on the federal level on federal lands, but there's also state lands, and it can be a tool from the people who want to stop development to delay a project, and then you end up with not having the resiliency you need.
One of my answers to that question would be build and design security at the very, very forefront of every project. Siting and routing does not consider security. They just don't. I have over 17 examples of talking with clients from security managers and directors, and I've asked them, what would you like to see changed if you could? And they would like to at least have a very small say in where these locations are being put, right? It may not be the determining factor, but it can help de-risk the amount of security protections that you need to implement, which drives down the build cost or unexpected cost overruns. And that equates to savings at the ratepayer's, doorstep.
Yeah, and very briefly, I'd just say one element of this gray zone conflict we're in with our adversaries is the idea of disinformation, misinformation, leveraging political or legal processes to achieve goals. And it certainly would not stretch the imagination to think that our adversary might be helping to enhance some of the problems that we faced, increasing those timelines for being able to get this stuff done.
Hi, yes. Obviously, I was on the previous panel on modernization, and I'm curious how that flows with grid security, because a lot of our old and outdated grid infrastructure does need to be digitized and modernized, and we need to have more digital equipment, power electronics on the grid. So you mentioned a couple really interesting organizations of people that are helping test equipment. And is there any way or existing process, or could we make an existing process that new technologies can go through to be certified of, hey, this is not a cyber risk, because all these professionals from the DHS to whoever looked at it and partnered with the vendor. And so then they could go to the utility and say, we know that this cybersecurity is an issue, and we've done X, Y, and Z to try and mitigate that already.
So there is no ROI on security protections. It's risk mitigation. And it's just like buying insurance, whether it be for your car, your life, your family, whatever. You want to have it in place so that way if something bad does happen, you're more than likely protected. So what I would suggest to you all, these security managers like myself in my past role, is come up with a better way of explaining the story to the people who fund these projects. A great example. So it's easy to quantify an investment on capital projects, but if you don't accommodate for the ongoing maintenance, preventive or corrective maintenance over the life cycle of this equipment, then it's going to degrade, it's going to fall apart, and then it's going to be completely ineffective. So there is a balance that whenever you ask for additional funding for security protections on a capital project, there's going to be an O&M implication for that. So prepare for that.
I will say that there are programs that do testing of systems. So one in particular is DOE has a program called Citrix, stands for Cyber Testing for Resilient Industrial Control Systems, I believe, where the government, researchers, and equipment manufacturers do partner to test this equipment. And so companies like SEL, like GE, will go and give their equipment to this team that will tear it down, look for vulnerabilities, report it back to the manufacturer, let them fix those vulnerabilities before it goes out. And so that does exist. The challenge with that is the throughput of the number of devices you can put through that process is minuscule right now. There are a number of efforts underway to automate a lot of these processes so we can start to do that testing at scales that are relevant for industry, because right now we can test a handful of devices, but it's only scratching the surface of what needs to be done.
Any more questions? All right. Well, I'll ask a final question to the panel then. I think, a lot of work to be done with transmission going forward. I think if there's sort of one thing you could signal to energy developers in the room for making strides with grid security, what would that be?
I'd
Be
just say
multiple
sharing information. It's been mentioned a number of times here, but really working together, the state partners, federal partners, the private sector, the utilities, talking together about the threat and how we mitigate it is the best thing we can do. And just being as open as we can with one another to share the threats we're seeing, to share the threats you're seeing, again, what's most critical to you, so that we can make sure those are covered, to me is the best thing we can be doing right now. Working on those grid exercises together, practicing what we say we're going to do. You can have an emergency plan on the bookshelf. Doesn't do you any good if you can't actually execute it. So practicing those things would make a real difference.
You took the words out of my mouth, man. No, the only thing I could offer in addition to that is, like I said earlier, test often, test frequently. Make sure that your protections, your mitigations are actually going to be functional years after they're implemented.
I mean, because one day you're going to need it, really.
Yep.
To say it's never going to happen is not rational.
So I will, add +1 to all of those points. I think they're spot on. The one additional thing I'll add is going back to the previous panel, grid modernization and grid security should go together. Just like we always hear the story about how, we built the internet and then, years later said, gosh, we should put security, think about security too. We shouldn't do the same thing with the grid. As we build out these new grid architectures, we should think, what are the security and resilience implications of that? How can we leverage what we're doing now in terms of modernization to make it more efficient, more sustainable, and also make it more secure?
Well, thank you so much to the three of you for this awesome wrap-up conversation. Please join us in thanking our panelists.
Thank you.
I'll just quickly close this out here. Really just want to say thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much to our speakers, moderators over the past couple of days. Thank you to Governor Polis and his team for hosting us, as well as Governor Cox for his continued leadership on this initiative. Also really want to shout out the WGA staff. It's always nice when the whole crew gets to be in the room, and really appreciate them being here. We'll have 2 more of these initiative workshops coming up, hopefully later this year into next year. So please do stay tuned and engaged with us for agenda information, registration, dates, locations. That will all be coming up hopefully very soon. Thank you all so much for being here. We'll have recordings of the sessions available on WG's website if you want to go back and re-listen to anything. Hope to see you at the next one.